This is my Guppy aquarium. It's a low-tech, no-filter pond-style setup with a massive footprint relative to the tank's volume. In the span of just 100 days, life has flourished, new animals have moved in while others await introduction, and this aquatic world has become unrecognizable. It's been fascinating for me to observe, and I'm excited to share that journey with all of you. After making countless aquariums over the years, I usually know what to expect. What surprised me here was how quickly the plants grew in. They filled in seemingly overnight, which was unexpected. After all, it's a low-tech system, and I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. The conditions must have been right for life to thrive, because within just a few weeks, it already needed a significant trimming. A goal I had for this tank was and is as little visible substrate as possible through a dense forest of plants. The first step to pulling this off was by trimming and transplanting Rotala cuttings. Another goal which I designed into the tank itself was easy access. The footprint and 360-degree view play a huge role in that. Honestly, maintenance isn't usually my idea of fun, but I find it very enjoyable and cathartic in this tank. Even so, I have to be mindful of curious fish while wielding the shears. Easy enough, I suppose, but netting out debris without getting a fish in the process is a different story. They're always so engaged with what I'm doing that they're oblivious to the net. Well, that is when I'm not introducing new friends. In that case, they immediately swarmed, greeted, and welcomed them into the fold. They were equally curious about these shrimp. Maybe it's the designer in me, but since I already have robust colonies of cherry and yellow sakura shrimp, it only made sense to complete the primary colors with blue velvets. They quickly disappeared into the forest, and it would be some time before I'd see them again. The newcomers weren't in the tank for long before it was ready for another trim. I'm usually not this involved with the progression of plants so early on, but I'm glad I was. Making constant adjustments helped me connect with this aquarium. Being swarmed by a herd of guppies certainly didn't hurt either. Anyway, I had only adjusted Rotala to this point. That's because it took longer for the other plants, like Pogostemon and Hygrophila, to settle in enough to follow suit. Regardless, the process was the same: trim and replant the stems to thicken the forest. This was also when I decided to add more plants, like Kabamba. I think it helped introduce delicate textures that were lacking from the initial selection. However, not everything was perfect. There is an issue with this tank that I noticed a day after I uploaded the video. This corner isn't perfectly aligned. I didn't panic because I knew silicone's flexibility is part of what makes it ideal for assembling glass aquariums. That said, I had to determine whether this was due to water pressure or an assembly mistake. Naturally, I couldn't find anything from the footage. However, when I zoomed in on the pictures I took, although faint, you can see it. That didn't really answer my question though, so I drained the tank to see if the glass shifted under lower pressure. It didn't move at all, which alleviated any concern I had, though I figured I should still do something. Initially, I planned to Euro-brace the perimeter, but I wasn't fond of the look. Instead, I settled on these sleeve-over shower clamps. However, the seam was in their way. Since I'll never fill the tank this high, and it doesn't provide any significant strength, I removed it without hesitation. I genuinely don't know if these clamps are necessary at all, but at least they don't look half bad. Anyway, I applied a generous amount of silicone, pressed them onto the glass, tightened the bolts, and removed the excess. Naturally, my buddies, who were increasing in number, eagerly oversaw the entire process, making sure I did a good job. The environment remained unaffected by all of that as time continued. In fact, it was ready for another trim and a more significant adjustment. I wanted to make room for other plants in the center of the tank. I carefully moved a lot of Rotala to different locations, including the very edge of the glass. Then I trimmed the Kabamba, which was going wild, and the Pogostemon, replanting the cuttings in the now open space. I was also curious how dwarf hairgrass would take, so I decided to add some. Immediately after, I realized the shrimp had emerged to inspect what I'd done. That was the first time I'd seen one since their introduction. The Hygrophila pinnatophyta, which was slower to establish, was finally ready to be reworked a month later. I had also been experimenting with this parrot's feather. It took better than I expected, but I had to remove some of the accent branches to make room for it and the expansion of the lily pads. Doing so created space below, which I filled with other trimmed plants. Between then and now, I took the longest break thus far from adjusting things inside this tank to focus on completing the new Ancient Ruins setup and to recover from being sick. All that's to say, I was eager to create these before and after clips when I could. The comparisons astounded me because even though I knew it had grown, I didn't realize it was this dramatic. It truly was night and day from its start in October, though it did need a trim. When I call this a pond-style tank, that refers to viewing it from above like a pond. That's one of the main ways this is meant to be enjoyed, and in my opinion, it doesn't disappoint. Overseeing the fish swim under the surface plants and through the forest is a joy. The typical view is nice as well, but there's a certain vibrancy I feel can only be appreciated from a top-down view. However, not everything looked good from this perspective, like plants with holes. I'd remove them while adjusting the forest below. This is probably where most of the changes occurred, though the view had become obstructed by algae on the glass. Still, it could have been a lot worse after 3 months of build-up. That then begs the question, how do I maintain this tank? I'll show you precisely what that looks like before adding an entirely new group of fish who have finally completed their time in quarantine. You've seen part of what I do already, and that's where we'll begin again by trimming the Rotala. The thing with most of my other tanks is that they don't take very long to maintain, even on trim days. However, I always tend to underestimate how long this one takes. That's because I end up with hundreds of cuttings each time, all of which have to be returned. Thankfully, this is one of the last times I have to fill in bare substrate. From here, I'll use the cuttings to thicken existing patches or pull them from the system completely. I don't know why, but these adjustments always seem to act like a magnet drawing the guppies in. Immediately, they want to be a part of whatever I'm doing. Now, I don't mind, but it does complicate the process a little. Anyway, I completed all of this in about an hour, and from there, it was smooth sailing. I removed the unsightly leaves from the lilies or those with odd growth patterns. This also ensures they don't block too much light from the other plants. The Kabamba, for example, had become scraggly as it reached around the lilies to get light. Most of its stems had to be trimmed and replanted to achieve a better look. I did the same for the wisteria. What I was actually most intent on doing, though, was scraping the glass. Now, I gotta say, I've used every scraper on the market, but nothing beats a simple razor. Sure, there's room for error, yet with a steady hand, they quickly and effectively complete the task. I must have grown accustomed to the foggy view, not realizing how much the algae obscured it. However, I knew that a water change from this apparatus would help too. I made it by combining a filter return, a vinyl tube, and a sponge. I like using it because it automatically drains the water to the level I want while protecting the fish. This gives me time to start netting out debris, though I usually don't get very far before refilling. Also, I realized I hadn't filmed the previous water changes, so I should probably mention that this was the 4th time I've done so since setting up the tank. Thankfully, I'm on a well, so all I have to do is match the temperature and fill it up. No need to treat for chloramine or anything like that. Then I finish netting up debris and clean the glass. On a side note, I like using these retractable shrimp nets. The small profile makes it much easier to work with an escape and around the livestock. The riparian plants don't require as frequent trimming, but their time had come as well. Most had acclimated to life and water quite well. So aside from removing a few wilted leaves or those blocking light, I didn't have to do much. That is until I got to the cotton candy fern, which told a different story. It is putting on new growth, but its start clearly wasn't as smooth as the others. So aside from the time it takes to adjust the plants, it's a pretty straightforward process. After all of that, it looked even better than it had before, though I think it will likely be at least 3 more months until the tank appears as I imagined it on day 1. Regardless, I'm pleased with its progress, and even more excited to finally add this school of pygmy Corydoras. There's always something so magical about seeing fish enter a new home. Here the Corys rested on the plants, curious about the environment they now found themselves in. Before long, the Guppies showed up as well, interested in who these new fish were. This helped give some perspective to how tiny these pygmy Corys truly are. Eventually they began filing out into the aquarium, finding other places to rest, before inevitably disappearing into the forest. That's one of the things I enjoy most about this tank. With double the usable footprint of a standard 100-gallon tank, it just has a way of enveloping these nano species. That adds a layer of discovery that makes it feel more natural, at least to me. Also, I feel that the cories were the best possible addition. The way they shoal around the scape together is simply beautiful. I'm also excited for when the shrimp start to take over because right now I almost never see them. Both reviewer recommendations, so I'm curious to know, what else do you think would do well in this tank? I knew I'd enjoy this when I made it, but I didn't expect it to become one of my favorite fish tanks I've ever made. As I said in the build video, to me, it's the perfect aquarium. Not that I actually think it's perfect, but that it perfectly showcases what an aquarium should be. An underwater paradise where aquatic life can live carefree while being enjoyed in wonder. Having worked with it for a few months now, I'm beginning to rethink much about how I make aquariums. I don't know what that looks like in practice, but one of the nicest things about this tank is the fact that it's low tech and thus silent. I don't know why, but as I get older, I'm growing fatigued with the constant hum of filters or splashing. That's a discussion for another time though. For now, I'll say that the journey with it so far has been very enjoyable. As many of you know, I generally don't make updates this quickly. It usually takes longer to develop a compelling narrative that captures the full perspective of what's happened. But I couldn't help myself with this one. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. I'll link up the original build video if you want to see exactly how I made it, and the time I recreated nature's takeover of ancient ruins. As always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.